What's in Governor Murphy's proposed budget for New Jersey? Listen as we break it all down. This is the IssuesWatch podcast. Hi, I'm Jeff Kazerman, Vice President of Government Relations at the New Jersey Society of CPAs, and welcome to the IssuesWatch podcast. On March 18th, we held a live broadcast with two public policy experts, Dale Florio and Chris Emmerholz, to examine Governor Murphy's proposed budget for New Jersey's 2026 fiscal year. In this podcast episode, we're going to share segments from the live broadcast. Dale is a strategic advisor at Princeton Public Affairs Group and is considered one of the top lobbyists in New Jersey. He has worked on behalf of the NJCPA for years. Chris is the Chief Government Affairs Officer at the New Jersey Business and Industry Association. He covers taxation, budget, and economic development. Okay, let me get things started with some highlights of the budget proposal. So this budget is $58.1 billion, an increase of $1.4 billion or 2.7% over the current fiscal year budget that was signed into law in June 2024. All in all, about 44% of the budget is going to school and municipal aid, with $12.1 billion for K through 12 schools and $1.3 billion for pre-K schools. There is $4.3 billion in direct property tax relief to individual homeowners and renters. $1.5 billion is budgeted for New Jersey Transit. There's a $7.2 billion full pension payment. Health benefits payments for active and retired state employees is at $6.7 billion. There are $1.2 billion in proposed new fees and taxes, including tax increases for realty transfers, sports betting, alcohol, adult use marijuana, and cigarettes. There's also $6.3 billion allocated as surplus. And this all leaves a structural deficit of $1.2 billion. Based on what the administration was telling the press, I was expecting to see a budget with significant cuts. However, this budget is essentially the same as last year's budget, but with an additional $1.2 billion in taxes. We recently surveyed NJCPA members about the proposed budget, and 80% said that it would make the economy worse over the long term. 9% said the economy will stay the same, and only 11% felt it would improve the economy. Turning to our experts, I asked Chris for his overall impression of the budget proposal. Here's what he had to say.
I think there's positives in this budget, but I was expecting more, and I think you kind of led us on with some of those things that there were high hopes that, hey, is the governor going to be a little more fiscally responsible and try to cut our spending levels, make it more sustainable? Is there going to be obviously last year, we were very concerned about a $1 billion tax on the business community, directly on the biggest job creators in the state. We weren't thinking we'd go there again, but I didn't expect to see another $1 billion plus tax increase proposed. I don't think a lot of people did.
And here's what Dale had to say.
God bless the next governor. You have that situation where the cupboard essentially is on automatic to go bare. You can't keep spending and using surplus, although we talk about $6+ billion in surplus, but we're not refilling the surplus like we once were. Right. So it's going away. The other question mark here is obviously our budget has to be done by July 1st. The other question mark is, what are the feds going to do?
Oh, yeah.
The federal government, Congress has pushed back the conversation about a budget, especially in the Medicaid area. And I know we'll probably talk more about that, but that Medicaid discussion won't be settled until probably September, October. Wow. So what we pass as a budget in the end of June may have to be pulled back. We may see the legislature having to come back into session, depending on the level of Medicaid cuts.
Wow.
So what you see, you may not see by the end of the year.
In his budget address, the governor praised the proposal's fiscal soundness. This is a clip from his address.
One of my single highest priorities as governor has been restoring trust in Trenton's leadership. And with every budget we have proposed, we have sought to make smart and prudent decisions today so our taxpayers feel more economically secure tomorrow and in the decades to come. And our budget proposal for the next fiscal year is no different. Thanks to the leadership of Treasurer Liz Moyo and her entire team, we have crafted a proposal that meets all of our sacred obligations to the people of New Jersey, from providing record high property tax relief to fully funding our public education system. But at the same time, we're also demonstrating restraint when it comes to spending taxpayer dollars. In fact, our budget will largely cap all new discretionary spending. In that same spirit, I'm also proud to report that our budget will include a more than $6.3 billion surplus, which will help guard us against unforeseen challenges, including the uncertainty that has swept over Washington. I think it's safe to say that we are facing more uncertainty at the federal level than at any other point in modern history. And this uncertainty has a direct impact on all of us, and most importantly, the people of New Jersey. We cannot negotiate a budget in a bubble. And while I sincerely hope that the situation in Washington settles down and that we in turn have a normal, healthy budget season over the next few months, that is by no means a guarantee. There is a distinct possibility that we will instead need to pursue a break the glass strategy.
I asked Chris and Dale if they think this is actually a fiscally responsible budget. Here's what they had to say.
Well, Jeff, I always try to be balanced, present both sides. And I think Governor Murphy does deserve some credit for paying the full pension payment now for the 5th year in a row. That's something that we had governors of both parties struggle with. And Governor Christie kind of put us on the path to eventually get there. Started, and thankfully Governor Murphy's kept that path, even accelerated that path, and kept it there. And it's very easy to say, hey, we can just kick the can down the road a little bit and spend this money to avoid maybe some of the cuts or some of the tax increases. But he didn't. Pension payments are important because we got to fix our fiscal ship of the state. Right. And if we don't get the pension payment, we don't do that. I think getting school aid payment to 100% of the formula, I think building up a healthier surplus. Now, again, some of that, the surplus, he was helped out by the COVID largesse of the federal government. He was helped out by the overly stimulated economy leading to greater tax revenues. He was helped out by the bonding that the administration did that didn't need to happen. But still, it put that into surplus instead of just spending it all. So I think the pensions, I think school aid, I think surplus, you see some movement. But I also think the glaring thing that I see is that the deficit spending. This administration has continued a structural deficit. Last year in your opening, you talked about it being over $2 billion. Now it's over $1 billion. It's a little smaller, but the fact that you still have this, you're spending $1 billion more than what you're bringing in revenue. That's the definition of not sustainable. And
right.
To Dale's point, we're giving that to the next
about?
governor. And so I don't think you can say that it's a responsible budget if you have a deficit.
Yeah, well, I was wondering where that was coming from in the speech. But so Dale, what do you think? Fiscally responsible?
Listen, I agree with Chris in terms of the pension payment and the school funding formula. And I think Chris would agree. We need a new funding formula, right? Our existing formula goes back to 2008. The land has shifted, populations have shifted within school districts. We need a new funding formula. Right now, the one we have is really not fair. I mean, the suburban school districts are really bearing an unfair burden here. The problem we have here is you can't go from a $38 billion budget under Chris Christie, his last budget, and approach $58+ billion. All of that money, that was all started by the COVID largesse and unexpected higher revenues from the major taxes. So rather than managing government, a lot of that money was put into what we would call Christmas tree items, right? Things that weren't sustainable. How much infrastructure did we do? We're still complaining about New Jersey Transit, right? when you have that kind of money and that type of available revenue, you want to put it into projects that are going to last a long time. It's not fair to give hope to nonprofit organizations that may be depending on this for their operating dollars, and then you're going to run into a next year or the year after, and they're going to be still coming back to state government for the money. So the social programs probably have grown too quickly. We haven't probably put enough money into infrastructure, right? And the next couple of years, we're going to pay the price for it.
Next, we fielded a question from one of the webinar attendees who asked how much of the budget is discretionary. Here's what Chris and Dale said.
Well, there's no right? Well, there's no right or wrong answer to that, because it's a very much eye of the beholder kind of thing. Right. And so we had previous governors where the pension payment was a discretionary thing, and some of the governors before Governor Christie started us on this path and Governor Murphy's kept us on this path, a lot of governors just, okay, the pension payment should be this, and they ignored that and they put in what they wanted to. And I think that was a mistake, treating that as discretionary. So I would, again, say things like debt service, I don't think anybody's thinking about not paying that, or paying for health insurance premiums for our current state employees, salaries for current state employees. There's things like that no one's ever contemplated not doing. But even, I say state employee salaries, well, there were years where there were furloughs. There were years where people looked at alternative ways to try to find money. So it is hard to say that nothing is not discretionary. Right. But I do think, and you talked about it at the beginning, the vast majority, maybe it's better to say how much money goes out the door that the state actually is not controlling and seeing their budget of what the individual departments are spending. But if the school aid's out the door, how much ability does the state have throughout the year to adjust that? Pension payment, it's going into the pension fund. How much ability does the state have to control that? So I would say a significant amount of the state budget is not easy to control. Right. In crises, we've seen some adjustments, and hopefully we never get there, because, again, to right that fiscal ship of the state, we want to be making sure our statutory requirements we're meeting.
Right. The percentage that's bantered about all the time, it's anywhere between 70 and 80% they say is non-discretionary. In other words, you got to do it. I would tell you that unless something is constitutionally dedicated, in other words, unless the tax is constitutionally dedicated, or there's a contractual obligation, and there are statutes, but as we've seen at the federal level, and governors too can ignore statutes. They do it all the time in terms of the spending of money. So constitutionally dedicated or contractual, as Chris said, discretion is in the eye of the beholder in terms of what you call discretionary.
I then asked Chris how this budget rates in terms of aid to small businesses.
I think that word disappointment that I use can be characterized here again. You talked about being disappointed that there had the potential of being more cuts, real cuts, to make the budget more sustainable. We didn't see that, but what we did see a lot of cuts is in our economic development programs. And unfortunately, the Main Street program, the manufacturing extension program, the manufacturing voucher program, the Commissions for Science, Innovation, Technology, a lot of programs that actually are stimulating the economy, they got cut. Right. And then the other large area that I saw cuts that were disproportionate compared to other things in the budget is higher ed. And again, higher ed, they're the guys who are innovating. They're the guys that are training the future workforce, good for the economy. And we saw a lot of cuts across the board in higher ed. I'll just bring up the $20 million cut, operating aid cut to our county colleges. They do great work. They are actually the definition of helping the kind of stronger, fairer kind of way to approach things of lifting up the first-time college goers, the lower income folks who county college might be the only option to stay in their neighborhood going to a college. And those are the folks that are going to be hurt by this. And by the way, they're also doing the lion's share of workforce development in the state and hosting other higher ed providers in workforce development. And we want to make sure that we have a strong county college sector that's doing the workforce development we all want and need. And I worry that these cuts to them and all higher ed might hurt that, especially just the manufacturing point, just to double back to that a little bit. I almost see a schizophrenic budgeting in some ways. So the governor talked up this new manufacturing tax credit, which sounds fantastic. And VA would love to see the details and is going to be happy to support that when we do see them. And manufacturing is important, the multiplier effect to our economy, the way it stimulates other things, great. So let's support it. but we're going to do a new tax credit, but yeah, we're also then going to cut a voucher program that helped them invest in their own equipment and a program that support the manufacturing extension program that does great work. I was like, well, do we care about manufacturing or not?
Right.
Let's go all in or let's not do that. I don't know.
Next, we turn to tax relief, which the governor mentioned several times in his address. Here's a clip.
Right now, the single biggest challenge facing the people of New Jersey is that the cost of living is way too high. And given the global economic disruptions, especially inflation, that have battered the American people over the past few years, it's really no wonder that our working neighbors feel as if they've been forgotten by those of us in power. So to every New Jerseyan who shares these concerns, here is my message to you. Our administration is going to spend every minute we have left fighting for you. And with our budget proposal, our administration will continue delivering economic security and opportunity to every New Jerseyan by providing yet another round of record high tax relief.
But there's $1.2 billion in new taxes and fees in the governor's proposal. So I asked Chris to clarify what tax relief the governor was referring to.
There are some tax cuts proposed by the governor that I think would make a difference to stimulate the economy, especially on the innovation side. I referenced the manufacturing proposal that the governor made. Also, Governor Murphy basically endorsed two bills moving in the legislature. One is an angel investor tax credit expansion. We have this program, but he wants to expand it. That's actually passed the Senate. It's moved through an assembly committee. And there's a new bill that's moving now. It's getting in the weeds. Like, QSBS, Qualified Small Business Stock.
Not new. We wrote that 8 years ago,
but
Chris.
New that it's moving in the legislature. It's never moved before. But
That's
thankfully,
true.
CPAs, you guys always have the best ideas coming out of your members. So it was a CPA idea, and BIA and Tech United, which is kind of like the Technology Association, are all supporting this because it's a way to support our entrepreneurs, startups in this area to kind of get more capital. And a lot of times these businesses starting out, they need help. And our state is a little bit less
generous.
We're not doing as much as other states are on this. So we're basically bringing our QSBS treatment in line with other states, which is a good thing for innovation economy in New Jersey. So we see those three, I would say, pro-manufacturing, pro-innovation, pro-startup things. And we also see this idea of we're dramatically increasing the sales tax on a bunch of items you referenced, Jeff, but we're planning to cut it on baby products and sunscreen. Again, positive thing.
Right.
Politics. It's all
Right.
A little bit of politics, yes.
It's not much money either. What is that? 10
Yeah, I don't
million?
think that's as stimulative, not a bad idea, but
Yeah.
not as stimulative to the economy. The other three ideas could be stimulating job creation and things we'd be happy to support.
The definition of property tax relief is so broad. I mean, it's kind of like living, in South Brunswick, but saying you have a Princeton address. I mean, it's like covers all of Central Jersey. So that's where governors, I mean, this governor is no different, but all governors talk about the amount of property tax relief that's given, but it could be any number of things that they want to say that you're getting back.
Right.
In addition to all the various rebate programs that we have. I mean, one of the ghosts in the room is the speaker's program.
NJ
Stay New Jersey.
Stay New Jersey.
Right. I mean, on top of the anchor program, and there's a price tag to that.
400 million, right, Chris?
It's big. Now, to people that are going to receive that money, we get that.
Right.
There are others that would say that we should just combine all these rebate programs into one, because the participation rate in a lot of these programs is not as high as it could be.
Yes.
People don't know about them, right? So, or we just not have rebate programs, and we put some sort of cap on your property tax bill or something that, right? I mean, but if you're into redistribution of income, the rebate programs work. If you think that we should just cut your property taxes directly and keep the money in your pocket, so there's two schools of thought on how you approach that.
Next, we talked about school funding. Here's a clip of the governor's budget address about that.
And it goes without saying, one of the most important investments we can make into New Jersey's future is supporting our children. That is exactly why our administration has made monumental investments into strengthening our best in the nation public education system. With every budget we have introduced, we have provided record high funding for our K through 12 schools. And with our final budget, we will once again fully fund New Jersey's public education system. And we're also going to reduce volatility in the school funding process by ensuring that no school district sees a steep reduction in state aid from one year to the next. Altogether, our budget will provide the single largest investment into New Jersey's public schools in history.
In the budget proposal, K through 12 schools are fully funded, but funding for community colleges and other higher education was cut. Here's what Chris had to say about that.
The shame about higher ed is, I think, when we think about everything the state funds, higher ed at least has the tuition backstop. And so if the state cuts them, and county colleges theoretically have a second backstop in the counties and the tuition. So yes, our colleges are public, and even private colleges were considerably cut in this budget with some of the aid, which is much, much smaller, but they used to get aid from the state, and it was cut quite a bit. I think it's important to fund all of higher ed, but I think there's a thinking in the state that if we cut them, they have other places to find money, unlike cutting K to 12. And so we often see this dichotomy of K to 12 goes up and up and up, and higher ed is often held flat or even going down in this year's budget. K to 12, they're both just as important, especially in this day and age where higher ed, greater technical skills, workforce development, what K to 12 is doing is just as important as higher ed. But I think sometimes we see that dichotomy, which I think doesn't make sense because we lose a lot of our students that we just invested hundreds of millions of dollars over time on, and they go to another state because they stay there and they realize, go to college there, realize how much more affordable it is, and they don't come back.
Next, I asked Dale some political questions. First up, whether he expects stiff opposition from legislators on the tax hikes or any other issues.
Well, I can say at the outset, Jeff, that 2025 will be a year that certainly I haven't experienced, and I've got a few years invested in politics and advocacy work for a whole host of reasons. The backdrop of Washington, right? That's a completely new dynamic that nobody's really experienced, right? Number two, again, probably a weed type thing, but the party line as we knew it has gone away. So counties can endorse, but when primary voters go into the ballot box in June, they're not going to see a line of Democrats or a line of Republicans that kind of guide you that if you're a primary voter in the Democratic primary, you're going to probably vote down that line. Now you're going to have people that are running for a particular office all grouped together. They might have the county endorsement slogan, right? But otherwise, people are just going to, it's going to be slogans. It's just going to be a glob of people for governor,
for each office,
glob of people for assembly. And you have to be familiar with the county endorsement slogan to really know who is endorsed by the local Democrat. So that has everybody very, very nervous in the primaries, both Democrats and Republicans. We're seeing more primary elections coming up, okay, which will be a month before the final vote on the budget, right? It'll be June 10th this year. We actually moved it back a week due to a major Jewish holiday. Right. So there are a lot of primaries, and that's why people are very hyper. They're hyper about maybe the cuts in the governor's budget for things that they had worked on for social service organizations or charitable organizations. They're nervous about maybe voting for these tax cuts that the governor's proposed. So it's very confusing out there in this world. So as I sit here today, I don't think we have a clear picture in which way leadership in both houses are going to take this governor's budget.
Really? Okay, interesting.
Yep. Then I asked Christian Dale what the word on the street is about the upcoming gubernatorial election.
I think up in the air is a good way to describe it. I think given some of the political discussion, the lack of a line that Dale talked about, this is unpredictable. Unpredictable with how we respond as a state to what's going on in Washington, D.C., and unpredictable with the lack of that party alignment that we've had in the past. I guess on the optimistic side, you hear a lot of people running for governor talking about affordability, talking about plans to grow the economy, talking about concerns about our tax climate on the Republican Democratic side. So I think there's reason to believe we will have a governor from either side of the aisle that focuses a little more on job creation, affordability, taxes than what we've been seeing with the high tax environment that we have. So I tend to be an optimist, and maybe that's not warranted here, but I think there's some good candidates on both sides that I feel good about. But there's also candidates that are running that are talking about businesses aren't paying their fair share. Well, we're paying the highest tax rate in the entire nation. That's not your fair share.
What is fair share? Right?
And there's candidates that are running that are talking about, hey, if the federal government does these tax cuts, we need to then increase taxes on those same people. And it's like, and that's not going to work, and that's not practical, and that hurts our competitiveness.
I mean, this environment, quite frankly, is somewhat unique in terms of competitive races, right? I mean, we haven't seen this when you think the last bunch of governor's races. It's been usually one or two people in a primary. So this is the most crowded primary in both sides that we've seen in some time, right? When I made my comment at the front end of the show, Jeff, about God bless the next governor, I was referring to both parties, right? I mean, whoever the next governor will be, Democrat or Republican, the budget is going to be a very, very serious problem.
Right.
I would just say on the Democratic side, you have 6 people running. And it's interesting. I've talked to a lot of people about it. Nobody's prepared to say this person is a front runner, although I've heard people talk more about Mikey Sherrill in that regard.
Right.
But I would say when you really look at the lanes that they're trying to excel in, whether it's the progressive lane, the more center left lane, each of them have an argument to be able to make a certain lane work for them.
Right.
Meaning that one of them could actually win with just 30% of the vote.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So at this point, it's too early to say to count anybody out, but it's possible somebody could win with 35% of the vote, which would be and we don't have a runoff system, so that person who gets the most wins.
Next, we talked about what people can do if there's something that's in the budget or not in the budget that they aren't happy about.
No, I would encourage you, because sometimes it's funny, having worked in the legislature, you would hear that, I'm getting an avalanche of calls if like 4 people called.
Yes.
And so if people reach out to their assembly members, their senators, and they make sure that, hey, you know what, if you tax digital services, that's going to make the cybersecurity platform that I need or the member outreach platform that I use more expensive, and it's going to hurt my company, or it's going to hurt my small bit, whatever it might be. If you tax, if you're a shore company and you provide amusement services and entertainment options, and you're going to tax much of those things in this budget with the participatory sports expansion of the sales tax, like tell people that this is how much it would hurt. And by the way, that same business that's providing all this stuff that's in Ocean City, Maryland, or Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, they don't have this tax, and therefore I'm at a competitive disadvantage for that. So if our legislators hear that from actually the real business people, and again, they love you, Jeff, they love you, Dale, they love, or maybe they love me, I don't know, but they appreciate us in the halls of the State House. But if there's actually a real constituent calling, it makes all the difference in the world. So I would encourage people to reach out to their legislators if they can and express what bothers you.
It's rare that people would write a letter. It's rare that people pick up a phone call. I've been involved in so many different grassroots advocacy campaigns. The simple phone call to a legislative office from a real person
huge.
Is enormous. I mean, and even if you got 5, 4, it has an impact. Yes. I'm telling you, it's, business, labor's unions seem to do it well.
Yes.
Business, I get it. You're trying to run a business, whatever, but it's so basic, it can have a tremendous impact.
Right.
As we wrapped up the presentation, I asked Chris and Dale for their closing thoughts. Here's what Chris had to say.
We're starting this process, certainly not at the end, and we've got a long way to go. And layering all the political machinations on top of this budget process will make it a unique one. Governor Murphy's last one also, and so other things that he wants to make sure he's accomplishing. And talked about the fiscal responsibility stuff. I would imagine he wants to make sure some of that is part of the legacy that he leaves, and hopefully the legislature doesn't mess with some of the things that are fiscally responsible in the budget, but can roll back some of those tax increases that will hurt our competitiveness, and maybe find some ways to restore whether it's higher ed, whether
Yeah.
it's manufacturing, some of those anti-business tax cuts. And I'm hopeful. I tend to be optimistic, and I often get in trouble for being too optimistic, but I'm hopeful that the legislature can make this budget a little better.
And now here are Dale's closing remarks.
I was going to say, I'm going to finish where I started and just say that 2025 is going to be a year that none of us have ever experienced.
Right. Right.
I wish I could just be a political scientist and kind of stand on the sideline, because it's a political scientist's dream.
Yes.
With Trump, the gubernatorial races, and the absence of the county line that I tried to describe to your, viewers, it's, as I sit here today, it's very difficult to predict. To Chris's optimism, I hope that, politics always plays a part in all of this, but I hope it doesn't dominate, right? Because that's not good.
Right.
To do a budget that's just so political that we come to regret it, because our fiscal future isn't in good shape, and too much politics would really put us in a bad way.
Big thanks to Chris and Dale for joining us again to dissect the governor's budget proposal. I know I learned a lot, and I hope you did too. To follow the progress of the budget, visit njcpa.org/njbudget. And thanks for listening and watching.